The Big Footy Port Adelaide podcast is proudly sponsored by New Vision.
My team, Conda, power. I love the power. I love the power.
G'day everyone, this is the Big Footy Port Adelaide podcast live on Port Fan Radio. I'm your host Macca 19 and joining me as co-host we have the lovely Portia.
Good evening, Macca. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Pretty happy with the week past, and certainly it's shaping up that we're going to have an interesting off-season this year.
Indeed, absolutely. It's been a big week for Port Adelaide this week.
Extremely. And there's more to come.
Absolutely. And our guest this evening is El Scorcho.
How you going, guys? Thanks for having me on again.
Great to have you back.
Thank you.
Well, we've got a lot to get through, so let's get straight into it and have a quick chat about the finals. The first final played on the weekend, Hawthorn versus Adelaide, 72-point win for the Hawks. As comfortable as you like there. The league's best forward line combo of Betts, the new Wayne Carey and that superstar Charlie Cameron combined for one goal and about 4 kicks between them.
Yeah, I think this was the result that everyone kind of expected was going to happen during the week and I suppose leading up to it, and we got exactly what we expected, but it's always nice when the Crows get a little bit ahead of themselves, and it's exactly what happened this week, I think. Yeah,
that's true. I guess for me, I was pretty well surprised at just how bad Betts and Walker actually were. I mean, they were pretty much non-events on the evening, and I probably expected a little bit better than that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, I guess we've been talking about what a great job. Yeah. We've been talking about what a great job Camporelli's been doing. So, again, adverse circumstances, and I guess that's still the case that there are adverse circumstances for the Crows. So, I suppose really you'd have to say that given what happened mid-season, they've had a pretty decent result.
Oh, yeah, I think they did all right to make finals, but at the same time, they had quite an easy draw. In terms of Betts, I think against the Bulldogs, he got a lot of those goals over the back where the Bulldogs were pressing quite high and the Crows were able to kick over the top of that or find their way through. And so Betts ended up being one-on-one, and when he's one-on-one, it's not, it's not particularly difficult for him. Obviously, it's a little bit harder when Hawthorn are a lot more organised and are committing a lot more players back and paying him a bit of attention, I guess. It was a very different game for the Crows in terms of how they were able to attack it. And as we were talking about beforehand, the Crows just seemed to know their way through with the Bulldogs, but it's come out this week that perhaps that was because they had been told beforehand what the Bulldogs were going to do.
Yeah. Very dodgy, Mr. Talia. Very dodgy indeed.
Yeah, but we have no real way of knowing if it's true, do we?
No. Well,
No.
It'll come out in the wash.
But they've got form for dodgy stuff. I just think they're like the Patriots without any success.
Yeah.
Who are we talking about here, Adelaide or the Bulldogs?
The Crows.
Definitely Adelaide.
Oh well, without any success. Yeah.
That's it. Man, the other final played, Sydney versus North Melbourne, probably not the most interesting of finals. Sydney go out in straight sets, losing by 26 points. Injuries did them in the end, really. North, they've won 9 of their last 11. I think they were 12th mid-year, and they've pretty much ridden their great draw into another prelim. Yeah,
no, it's certainly a good result for North Melbourne to get as far as they have. I think there'd still have to be extreme doubts about them progressing any further, particularly against West Coast. I think that's pretty much the end of North Melbourne's season coming up. And if anyone knows, take that last final as a good way to end it.
Yeah.
Disagree?
No, I tend to agree. I think North they got Richmond at a good time because it was the finals, and they got Sydney at a good time because they had half their players out. So, they're the kind of team that can upset North Melbourne because they do have a lot of players that can come together at the right time. But in terms of them being able to do that back-to-back weeks, I very much doubt they can do it. And if they can, you think they'll probably get steamrolled by whoever they play in the grand final. So, they'd have to be the least favourite by a long way.
Yeah, comfortably.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. So I guess the most interesting final would be Hawthorn versus Freo. Do Hawthorn stand a chance? It'd be tough to write them off, really.
They've got a lot to play for. They've sort of, I suppose you'd say, they're nearing the end of their grand final contention run, looking at their list, with Pavlich about to zot off into the sunset. But Hawthorn are not exactly a young side these days either. It'll be a really interesting battle to see what happens. I don't really have a way that I'd favour this game going in terms of their form lines. Freo at home in Perth, you'd have to say they're probably the favourites, but I guess what we'll see is that if one side is a clear winner, then the other side might well be on the decline next year.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think it's been interesting with Hawthorn in the media over the last couple of weeks because they got crushed by West Coast and all of a sudden they were on the way down and they were done and this could be it for them, and then all of a sudden they beat Adelaide of all teams who fell into the finals on the back of a good draw, and all of a sudden now they're a superstar unbeatable team again, and they're going to take the competition by storm and smack Freo and run away with it. So, well, I think Freo in Perth, you'd have to think Freo would be more desperate.
I'd kind of wonder if it's a little bit like the old back in 2004 when Port and Brisbane had both been up the top for a fair while. And then, Port won the premiership. And the next year it was West Coast and Sydney. It was like completely different teams right up there because the others had just sort of hung on as long as they could. And I feel like it's possible, not saying it is, but it is possible that both of these teams are in that category. We might see something completely different next year.
I think we're all sort of hoping for a Derby Grand Final just to see what actually happens.
Yeah. I look, it'd be good to see. I don't know why it'd be good to see. I think it'd be good to see just from that perspective of Victorians complaining about non-Victorian teams being in the grand final. But now I think about it, I mean, Victorian teams have been dominating them for a while now, and I sort of include Sydney as a Victorian team, considering they half are. I don't know. I think it's a nice thought, but I guess it'll be a really big deal for Perth, and I suppose it'll be their absolute horror of horrors. If you're the winner, then you own Perth, and if you lose, then you can't escape it. So it's, I suppose, pretty high stakes for both teams if that happens, and you'd hope to see a pretty good grand final fight. Might be the best one in a decade.
Well, let's move on and talk about Port Adelaide. I guess the first thing to talk about is the delistings. We've made 8 changes to our playing group for 2016 so far. Off the rookie list come Tom Logan after his great career, Sam Russell, Johan Wagner, and of course Flinney at the start of the season. And off the senior list, Kane Corns retired, and then we say goodbye to 3 tolls in Jared Redden, Mason Shaw and Mitch Harvey. Maybe a couple of surprises there. I certainly didn't expect the club to delist both Shaw and Harvey.
I think it's one of those things where you look at it and at the end of the year when people forget what order everything happened in, it makes perfect sense. So what that says to me is like you're dropping, some tall players there that maybe there are questions about their ability to work hard or have the fitness or whatever else. But the areas they're in, when we've signed, it all makes perfect sense. So it could just be that, first of all, it meant that we had Schultz over the line, which realistically, given the timing, we must have done. And it also probably means that we worked out a trade for Dixon as well. So it's an interesting gambit. It means that we are sort of sacrificing the future for today. But I think if we were ever at a point to be considering that sort of ballsy move, this is probably the time to do it, because I've said it previously, I feel like the rest of our team, our midfield, our defence, is good enough going into next year. And if we can basically just make sure that we've got good enough forwards to get through the next couple of years, which you'd hope that Schultz and Dixon would do between them, then we can have a real impact on the competition next year, and hopefully Jagger, another key forward. It might also mean that there's a huge amount of faith being shown in someone like Dougal Howard or Logan Austin or Billy Frampton even to come along. It could just basically say that they're happy with how those project players are progressing to the point that they've sort of overtaken the guys that were drafted a year or two earlier and higher. So either way, it's kind of good news, because it either means that we're really focusing on a premiership push, or it means that our big allotment of tall guys that we've had on the list a couple of years is starting to show some sort of fruit for the list going forward, and they're confident in the guys that we've picked up.
I mean, Mason Shaw's a disappointing one. I had pretty high hopes for him. I really loved his physical attributes, but he just really failed to develop. And essentially, he was pretty well useless this year after injury. And I don't think you can really afford to do that in this day and age. You need to put your best foot forward when you're out on the park, and you just couldn't do it.
Yeah, well, we're talking about the leadership group a little bit later tonight, and something I'm going to discuss in that section will sort of touch on that, but it's mostly the importance of work ethic to a Port Adelaide side, but we'll get into that shortly.
Yeah, look, I think that was the thing with Shaw. He did have some injury issues, which is a bugger for him, but he just didn't do enough when he was on the field. And I think probably Harvey's issues seem to be, and the question marks over him were maybe his movement and his ability to get around the park. And I mean, they talked about his tank, about his agility, that sort of stuff. I think really what's cost, well, both of them their list spot is the fact that we played Butcher and he came on and played reasonably well. I think if he'd crashed, we probably would have ended up keeping one of them.
Yeah, probably.
So yeah, look, it's interesting. Look, as I think Portia's dead on. That clearly either means that a at the start it meant that we had Schultz and we were very, very confident of getting Dixon. It also meant that we're really happy with how Dougal, Howard, and maybe Frampton, if he's playing as a forward. Overall, I mean, I was very shocked, and I think I said something like it'd be a silly list decision beforehand. But going forward, knowing that Schultz was going to sign up, it's worked out really well. And look, it's a shame because I quite like both of those players and what they offered. But going forward, I'm happy with the decisions we've made.
Harvey, I'm going to be very honest here and say I'm just pretty angry about the fact that, not that we delisted him, well, maybe the fact that we delisted him, but for the fact that we actually drafted him to begin with. He was to draft a slow, unfit, fat kid and delist him 2 years later because he's a slow, unfit, fat kid with minimal AFL attributes just does my head in. And I said at the podcast at the time I wasn't happy with the pick. We had Michon, who was baffled by it as well. It was a shit pick then, it's an even shitter pick now when you see that Riley Knight goes to Adelaide the pick after and he's played some pretty good footy. And what burns even more is Ben Brown goes to North Melbourne 2 picks after, who's a 200cm giant with fantastic marking ability, good pace, can chop out in the ruck. He's averaging over 1.5 goals a game in his short career to date. Kicked 4 goals in a final last year, 2 in the first final this year. We've made some draft howlers over the years, and obviously every club has, but I think this one's going to be near the top of the list for a long time. You're
picking a guy because you think there's some potential to progress, because don't forget at junior level he was still reasonable, and there would have been some hope that we've talked about it before, that Port Adelaide under Burgess, the one thing we can improve is fitness, and I think every club would be a little bit confident of that. So if you think, well, all that's missing from Harvey's game is fitness, then maybe it's worth the punt. But if the hard work isn't there or injury or whatever else gets in the way, then yeah, it doesn't work out. But anything after, say, pick 40 is entirely speculative, and we made a wrong call, but I don't think it's anywhere near the worst pick we've made.
I think we would have thought we could get him fit and get him moving. He just didn't seem to have a lot of agility. Shaw seemed to have that kind of agility, but he obviously couldn't impact when he was on the park. I think Harvey will be a very good state league player somewhere when he gets to his mid-20s, and I think he'll probably, wherever he ends up, I assume he'll probably be in the SANFL somewhere. I think he'll be a very good state league player, but maybe doesn't quite have the ability to move around fast enough and cover enough ground to be an AFL player.
He's essentially another Michael Wunke, who pretty similar really. But the thing that does my head in is the fact that we probably, I don't think there was really many other clubs that were interested in him. If we wanted to, we could have picked him up very, very late in that draft. We chose to jump the gun, pick him up, early-ish, and probably bitten us on the arse, to be honest. So that's not one that I'm overly happy with. And if it is because of fitness that we've dropped him, then I don't know, maybe he deserved another year or two to see if they could really get that sorted, because he is a good mark. He's a fantastic kick for goal. I don't think he ever really had sort of AFL attributes, but I don't know. I guess we'll see. I guess the other one to talk about is Jared Redden. His career looks to have come to a close because of injury. It seems like his body just can't really cope anymore with the rigours of AFL footy.
Yeah. I just think a couple of years ago, he was the gun coming through, and Lobe looked like he was never going to be anywhere. And it seems like so long ago that was the case now, just because of He's been so injured and just hasn't been able to get himself into any kind of regular footy and form. And in that time, Lobies obviously had a really good 2014, maybe not quite as good 2015, but probably a lot higher level than what Redden's playing. So it's a shame because he definitely showed a lot. And I think for a while he was looking like he'd be really good, but unfortunately your body's got to hold up, and it hasn't happened for him, unfortunately.
For me, I'm not ruling out the idea that he'll get drafted as our ruckman on the rookie list. I think that's quite possible. His recovery from injury, I mean, with ruckman, that can take a couple of years to get back to anything.
I don't think his body's good enough. I think his body's shot. I think that's the reason why. I think his form, his ability is obviously good enough, but I don't think his body can cope with it. So I don't think we'll be redrafting him. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know.
I could see him going on the rookie list. But it'll depend on the medical report, as Macca says. If we think we can get him fit and keep him fit, I mean, we've had a bit of success with that in the past with players like Gray and Hartlett who look like they'd never get fit. But if we think we can get him fit, I can see us rookieing him. But otherwise, I'm not really fussed either way, to be honest.
Absolutely. Next topic of discussion is Schultz re-signing. Probably the biggest Willie Won't-he story for Port Adelaide this season. And it's finally over. After talks of him joining Freo, Jay Schultz has signed a one-year deal to stay at Port for another season, which I've got to say makes me incredibly happy.
Yeah, I was going to say, Macca, did you have a little bit of a cry afterwards? Like, oh, that's so lovely,
I almost did. It was a zen moment. Yeah, I saw a rainbow at the same time, and yes, I could have died very happy right then.
And a baby smiled.
A baby did smile, yes. And then my baby vomited on the ground, so that's kind of ruined it a little bit. But outside of that, yes, very happy. Very, very happy Schultz is staying. There was an article over the weekend stating that he was offered $400,000 over 2 years. Turned it down, was offered 1 year at $480,000. His manager turned it down, was expected to get a bigger offer from Freo, which never came. Now he's accepted $400,000 for the 1 year, so... Looks maybe like Liam Pickering stuffed up on that one a little bit.
Obviously, that second year would have been nice to have going forward. And also, playing through a season without a contract for the next year, particularly when you're a senior player that has had an injury-riddled career, that must have been so stressful for Schultz in the second half of the year, just trying to think, oh, God, am I going to be playing at all next year? What if something goes wrong? You'd be paranoid. You'd be watching every door and trying not to trip on anything. It'd be awful. And I think in that respect, like if there's anything that Schultz could complain about, it's being encouraged by his manager to go for a gambit when he's just probably not in the position to take those sorts of risks with his personal career and his income.
Surely when you're 30 and you've had a long history of injury, if someone's offering you $400,000 over 2 years, you say, where do I sign? Thank you very much.
You'd think that. But there's always the tall forward premium. You never know how much someone's going to pay until you put them in a position to pay it. And again, we've talked about this in previous weeks where Port Adelaide, when they make an offer, they're usually pretty serious, but other clubs are not. And Freo have just sort of obviously disappeared. So, but I don't know. It's hard to say. But
I wonder just how much he's been screwed over by Cam McCarthy stating that he wants to go home.
Yeah, maybe. I think if you're talking about Port players going to Freo, I mean, there's not really been a fantastic track record for the Port players that do that at the tail end of their careers. We've got Francis and Schofield are two that come to mind, and I don't think either of those worked out all that well. I wonder how long it'll take for Port players in their late 20s, early 30s to think, yeah, I'm not going to listen to Freo this time. I don't know.
Coaching changes, two major changes from last week. Nathan Bassett comes in and will be our defensive coach for 2016, which is fantastic. And we also see the return of Chad Corns to Port Adelaide. He's going to come in and coach the Magpies in the SANFL, which is also fantastic. Gary Hockey moves into Carr's old role in the midfield, whilst Nix takes over the forward line.
Yeah. I'm not sure what I think about that.
Probably, like the most obvious position for those players, I think, for those coaches going forward. I think it's all slotted together pretty nicely. Obviously having Chad back at the club, we are confident that we can control whatever was going on when he was here last time. And when it's good to be that kind of club that can welcome someone like that back. And he would have had a lot of experience at GW.
We've had a complaint. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
We had a complaint throughout the year that we need to have a forwards coach that's a forward, and I think that us putting Nix there just seems kind of counterintuitive in that regard. I don't know if this is sort of him proving that he can be a senior coach and it's being done for that reason. because obviously a senior coach needs to be able to have a good idea of how to manage players all across the ground. But it does make me wonder a little bit. And Hocking to midfield, I don't know. Are we behind Hocking as an intelligent coach, as a strategic coach? Because that's the one thing our midfield really, really needs, and I would have kind of preferred to see Nix in midfield, is someone that is really, really sharp and can read how players are going and make adjustments to the team accordingly. I mean, that's where, for me, I'd want my most tactically astute coach. And I don't know, but I don't know that Hocking would be that guy. I'm a bit worried.
Yeah, I think he'll be better than what we had last year. So I'm prepared to give him the benefit of that again. With him and Boss, that's a lot of... I mean, yes, being a midfielder in 2015 is a lot different to being a midfielder in 1999 kind of thing. But they've both got a lot of, improvement. Clearly, I guess clearly the Ken and the other coaches are quite happy with what they've done. But yeah, with Nix, I tend to agree. He's not a forward, and it's another issue about how forwards make space and position and stuff. But Nix, if he's got senior coaching aspirations, needs to be able to prove that he can get it done. And if he turns us into a really dangerous forward line, that's going to be really good for his career. So that kind of pressure on him is good for us. With Hocking, I think I think we have Carr there last year. I think I'll be happy with Hocking than Carr. I think, but as you say, short of poaching a big name, I'm not. I think this is with the I guess the pieces we had. I'm pretty happy with Shuffle.
All right, so what we're going to do over the next 6 or 7 weeks is go through our playing list, see how each player performed in 2015 and maybe what their expectations should be for 2016. Each week is going to have a bit of a theme, so we can review similar types of players. Thanks, Portia, for that idea. This week the theme is the captains, so we're going to be reviewing the leadership group, see how they performed in 2015 and what improvements can be made next year. I guess before we start talking about individuals, how do we think the leadership group performed as a whole through 2015?
Well, look, I mean, if we're talking about them as a group, you'd have to say they didn't really do all that well. I think individual performance was not really where it should be, really for any of them. I think Hartler would probably be the only one I'd say definitely would have been close. But I think that as far as their ability to also rally the side, I'm not really sure. But I'm not sure how much of that is on them and how much is on the coaches. And a lot of that comes down to how the captaincy and the leadership group is structured, I guess, and also what sort of authority they have to make changes to the team and what sort of power that Port Adelaide's culture gives them to make positive change. It's very hard to know from the outside, but I'd say that they probably haven't had a great year.
I thought it was a bit underwhelming, to be honest. I think there was a number of games where we just didn't really seem to have too much leadership out on the park at all. I'm talking about the losses against Carlton and Brisbane, maybe Geelong as well, maybe the Crows in the second showdown. I'm just not really sure what our on-field leaders were doing during those games to stop those embarrassing losses.
Basically, I tend to agree. I think statistically they're all pretty similar to where they've been for the last few years, but just not seeming to have that ability to pick us up and drag us over the line. Bar maybe Hartler, who probably had his best year for the club. The likes of Boak, Lobie, and Jonas, I guess just didn't seem to have that kind of ability late in games to make sure we win the game like they did in 2014 and even 2013.
One of the topics that got brought up in the thread on Bigfoot is the question of, is our leadership group too big? Do we need to cut it down a little bit, or is empowering more players on the park the right thing to do?
I think that I'm not sure that that's necessarily the question. I think it comes down to how we want to govern the team as a whole. I don't think there's ever can really be too many leaders, but there probably can be too many people giving orders. So that might be where the issue is coming from. This is an unusual structure in that we have captains on the team, on the field, but I don't know if it's entirely clear what their precise duties are, because we have a lot of assistant coaches and we've got a head coach and they'll have an input on how players perform on the day, and every single one of those coaches is more definitely listened to than the captains would be. So it's really quite a complicated thing to organise I suppose, work out what they're responsible for. So on the field, what is Boak responsible for? Like, he's not responsible for making positional changes. He's really just responsible for making sure that people work fairly hard, in which case I'm not sure how much he can do on the field. And then it comes down to what do the captains do off the field, and that can be encouraging other players, setting a good example through their own work ethic, and basically keeping players not in line, because that's really the wrong way to look at it when you're dealing with elite players, but just keeping them focused. And that's very hard to tell whether we had that happen. But I guess the result would say, for the most part, we were not focused, and maybe that was part of where we fell down. Is just that maybe the roles for the captains were not clear, and that could be part of the issue.
Well, we have seen the likes of Lobie and Jonas dropped earlier. Had they not been part of the leadership group?
I think definitely, and I think maybe that was a bit of the issue, is that we probably had a few of these guys. If we look at Ebert, Lobie, Jonas, who are down on form, even Boak a little bit. I think if you look at Trengove and Wines had injury issues, and maybe that was affecting their ability to do what they needed to do on the field and really stand up. When Lobie's worried about not putting every hit out down the throat of an opposition midfielder, he can't focus on being a leader. When Jonas is getting beaten, he can't be a leader. And I think maybe that was an issue across the board. When Ebert's worried about where his kicks are going and making sure he's hitting targets, it affects their ability to be leaders and drag people along just by do as I do kind of thing. So I think maybe that was an issue all year. And on top of that, then obviously Jonas and Lobie should have been worried about their form for a long time before they were dropped, and maybe that's affecting again their ability to lead the team, and that's why we just didn't seem to have any leadership, maybe because these guys are so worried about their own form that they can't really worry about everything else.
If that's the case, and I'm not saying it's not the case, but if that is the case, then that really, I think that just kind of epitomises the problem we have as far as leadership culture. And it's a problem that's not unique to Port Adelaide. It's a problem that every AFL club has, which is that you have to walk a line between making your culture about talent, prestige, hard work and performance. Those are really the four things you need to think about. So if you look at Lobie and Jonas, we say that, okay, if they're out of form, then they can't lead. And it's like, well, why is their personal form an impact on their ability to be a leader? If it is, then it says that we're making our leadership based on prestige, and that is not really a good way to go. That's how you end up with, I suppose, a previous Port Adelaide with Choco making comments like 80% of Sean Burgoyne is better than 100% of another player. That's probably too much leaning towards the idea that talent and prestige are the things that you measure seniority in a side by, and it's certainly a talented leadership team. But it's conflicting with the idea that you reward hard workers. If you put in a team full of hard workers as your leadership group, well, there's a nice quote that I actually wrote down, which is from General William Westmoreland, and it basically goes like this. It is certain only with either fortune or discipline can catastrophe be avoided. Of the two, the only one you can never run out of is discipline. It's really, and you'll see a lot of things in, I suppose, leadership documents basically saying that the hard work is the most important thing. Floss Williams, you look back at the Creed, and it's all about personal sacrifices and aggression, and neither of those things require talent to actually be functional. And so when you talk about leadership, and particularly leadership in a Port Adelaide side, it really has to come down to hard work. And that's where we see the conflict between hard work and talent, because we're seeing in this off-season, I feel like what we're seeing is that Ken Hinkley is being forced to make a stand on where he values those two against each other. And I think in the past he's valued hard work. And certainly our delistings, you'd have to say, dropping Shaw and Harvey and Redden, potentially indicating a leaning towards hard work over talent. But then you sort of think, okay, what about the guys that we're keeping? So Mitchell, yeah, he works pretty hard. Paul Stewart, I guess he works fairly hard. At what point do you say hard work is the core of our team, but then not also say, well, actually talent is quite important to us too? Because hard work is great for leadership. Talent is hard for leadership. It's hard to manage egos, and it's hard to manage status within a team if you base it around talent. So it's a real challenge. I think that the good Port Adelaide sides, they rely on hard work, but it's between a team of players that are actually fairly level on talent, and that might be the area where we certainly improving, and that makes the leadership easier as well, I suppose.
No, well said. All right, let's start talking about some of the individual leaders. Obviously, the place to start is our captain, Travis Boak, who's 27 years old. He played 22 games this year, kicked 13 goals, played every game for the first time in his career, averaged 25.5 disposals, 5 clearances, 4 inside 50s, and 5.5 tackles per game. Was probably slightly down on his output from last season, but for me, was pretty well down on his influence across the season as a whole.
Yeah, look, it's pretty sad that we're looking at our captain who's getting an average of 25 possessions and saying he had a down year, but it's also kind of good as well. We know he can play better than that, and you'd have to say that probably the support in midfield wasn't there that there could be. I think going into next year, I think just the structure of our midfield is going to improve and make it more viable for Boak to stand out. So he had a down year, but part of that is team performance because he cops tags. But if we see, again, we've talked about it previously, Pollock come back, if we see Brendan Archie continue his form, if we see Ollie Wines come back, Sam Gray continue to perform at a decent level, then that certainly should open up some space for Boak to, I suppose, be a bit more obvious on the field next year, and I suppose that always is going to help a little bit with being a positive leadership role on field as well. But this year, certainly a little bit disappointing. I don't know if it's all his fault.
A couple of people on the forum mentioned, do we think that Boak maybe suffered the most from the lack of support from Wines and Pollock being injured throughout the year?
Yes, absolutely.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the real sort of noticeable things about Travis's game this year was that, for me, he really seemed to struggle with getting the outside ball. He always seemed to be under intense pressure every time he went near it, often rushed his disposal a little bit. He didn't really have many people sort of blocking for him. And that was a major part of his game, which I thought went missing a little bit this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he's trying to play that middle role, sort of part inside, part outside, then if you take away the sort of the pure inside guy in Wines and the pure outside guy in Pollock, as pure as they can be, then you're sort of cutting both his legs off, and he's just sort of going around on his knees, literally sometimes. And so, yeah, that's not great. He had all his support cut out. So, again, I don't think it's on him. A lot of his form for this year were just unfortunate injuries.
Yeah, I didn't think he had a bad year. I just didn't think he had the season that maybe he was expecting, and certainly not at the level of his previous two. I still think he'll probably finish in the top 5 in the best and fairest, though. Scorcho, how did you see your season?
Yeah, look, I tend to agree with you guys. I think, statistically, he wasn't that far down. And he was getting involved, but he was just copying a pretty hard tag. And I think the real difference was just he didn't have as many of those games where he just seemed to pick us up and drag us over the line when we were close. And I definitely agree that the lack of guys like Wines and Pollock and maybe the lower form of guys like someone like Ebert hurts him. So, yeah, look, overall, he didn't have too bad a year. I think as you say, I think he'd definitely be top 5 in the best and fairest. But just didn't have those really high moments where he really I guess won a game for us of his own boot. It just didn't seem to happen as much this year. No doubt. I mean, as Portia said, it's a pretty good thing when someone can have a year as good as he did, and we're all a little bit disappointed with it. And hopefully next year we've got a few players back, and he's able to put it all together again and get off the chain a little bit and really hurt some teams, because I just don't think it was as damaging this year.
Yeah,
I tend to agree with what you guys are saying.
And just one other thought on that is that having a year where he has been forced to grind out every possession, that's going to have him in fantastic stead in future years, because it means as soon as they let him go a little bit, he knows how to put up a really tough patch. And so as soon as he's got a little bit of space, he's going to be in a position to punish sides, because, yeah, if you don't watch him every second, and he's used to being watched every second now, I think he could become a more explosive midfielder for those momentary lapses in opposition sides. So yeah, I think it's been a good year for him to become accustomed to that sort of pressure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Boak's one of those players in the AFL, and there's a few of them where you just absolutely have to tag him because his influence can be cut by the tag. But if you don't tag him, he explodes and has those 40 possession 3-goal games where he just absolutely dominates. So I mean that's also good for guys like Gray, Pollock, even Wines going forward, where they're not going to have to cop that tag because Boak's doing it for them. And if someone goes, we should probably maybe give a bit more more attention to Robbie Gray, we'll send our best tagger to Robbie Gray. Bloke just explodes and has a ridiculous game. So, I mean, if his performance is down going forward, as long as overall as a team, our midfield's performing really well, I can probably handle that because we know he's always going to get the first tag. And he's still be able to perform at a reasonably good level with that tag. And there will be games going forward where he'll have been a little bit quiet, someone will go to Gray, and both will get 40 touches and absolutely dominate the game. So just teams that aren't smart enough to remember to tag him. So, but hopefully next year he can break free a few more times than he did this year.
Yeah. I think we also saw maybe a little bit of a change in the way that he was actually played this year. He seemed to spend a lot less time up forward. Certainly through 2013 and 14, he did spend a fair bit of time on a forward flank. And you look at the stats, he only took 6 marks inside 50 this year. Last year he took 14. He kicked his lowest amount of goals since 2012 as well. So I thought that was maybe a little bit of a change in the way that he was played, maybe because of the team struggling in the midfield for much of the year. So maybe the coaches thought that he needed to spend more time in the centre square itself.
Yeah,
definitely. I think that's the case, Macca.
He certainly had some good games though. I thought round 4 versus Hawthorn, 30 touches, he was fantastic. In the first showdown, 33 touches and a goal, he was brilliant as well. And the game against Essendon at Etihad, I think he had 28 touches and 2 goals. So certainly had a lot of very good games, but maybe a few more poor ones than we kind of were expecting throughout the year. I didn't think he was all that good against Sydney or Geelong. And the 2 games late in the year against Gold Coast and GWS, I thought he struggled.
Yep, no, I'd agree with that. But I think that his consistency, like even across all those games that we're talking about where he had a fantastic game or a poor game, I think he's been pretty decent in all of them. Like there's none where you just sort of... There's none of our losses where you'd say, oh my God, Boak was terrible that game. I think even in the worst games, he was still pretty decent. So it's a good season to see from your captain in that respect. I think it was just, good consistent year.
No doubt. All right, moving on. Brad Ebert, his 25-year-old vice-captain. He also played 22 games, kicked 10 goals, making it 93 consecutive games for the club since he crossed over from West Coast. Ebo averaged 23.2 disposals a game, a career high. He also had 5.5 tackles, 3.5 inside 50s, and 3 clearances a game. I thought his season as a whole was pretty similar to last year, maybe the year before as well, where he had a really huge first half of the season. People were sort of talking about him in sort of All-Australian circles before really struggling through the second half of the season. He averaged 25 touches to round 11, only 20 after that. And as we've spoken about on the podcast before, maybe his quality of disposal really let him down throughout the year as well.
Yeah, I guess if I was pinpointing someone slightly less obvious to query the leadership team spot, it might really be Ebert. I think certainly, obviously his finishing ability is very iffy at best, but also I think back on his year and I think, he's had some pretty good games, but he's not a player I really think of as being someone that straightens us up on the field or really does any of those obvious leaderly things on the field to really justify that leadership team position. And I'm not saying, that he's terrible at it, but I'm just wondering whether there might be someone better suited to that kind of role than Brad Ebert going into next year. I'm not convinced that he's the right fit for the leadership team, honestly, unless he does something amazing off field.
I think what Ebert brings is that real just running power, and obviously in 2014 he was the one who was streaming forward, taking a semi-contested mark as the opposition team I guess scrambled back to try and stop us, and he was really that link man, and his work rate was just amazing. And for him to have pretty similar numbers, even better numbers, in a year where teams set up to stop exactly what he was doing is a credit to his work rate, and I think that's probably what he offers in terms of leadership. Is I guess just he's one of the hardest working players in our team and has been since we got him over. I guess his issue this year was just kicking. He seemed to do the Ben Jacobs style. It's not like he shanked a kick. He just kicked it directly to the advantage of an opposition player. And I mentioned it in another podcast. What my mum said earlier in the year, she reckons maybe he's got a vision problem because it's not like he's in a John Butcher set shot. You know what I mean? He doesn't have a bad looking kick. He just seems to miss an opposition player standing where he's about to kick it, and his turnovers hurt, and especially where the kind of places on the ground that he's turning the ball over tends to hurt us. So Hopefully he can sort that out, whatever is causing that issue, whether it is just the fact that he's fatigued or whether there is something else on top of it. But yeah, I think his work rate was really good, and hopefully we're able to break free a little bit more in terms of game plan and not be so kind of cut down by what the opposition are doing. And I think his work rate will really shine through, when that happens. So hopefully he can have a better year. But yeah, just that disposal's got to be fixed.
I think he's probably a bit of an interesting case study because his last couple of seasons have followed suit pretty much the same. And, it is really the second half of the season where his foot skills really do sort of struggle. So I do wonder if it is maybe a fatigue thing. Maybe he's sort of struggling with fitness through the second half of the season. Maybe he's running himself ragged a little bit and his foot skills are sort of paying the price because of that.
Yeah, look, I'm not convinced it's a foot skills thing. And just thinking back, I mean, when you think about the reputation that Brad Ebert had at West Coast before we traded for him, it was much the same story. Like, they didn't think he was good at pinpointing targets. And so it could be a vision thing, but it could... One of the things that all the recruiters love is when someone has that thing that Stephen Salopek was reputed to have, which is that, I think they call it psychomotor, or the ability to take in information, make a decision, and actually absorb that information. So when you look around the field, you can see where all the matchups are without having to go through and pick them all out. It could be that that's where Ebert's flaw is, as opposed to like actual, ocular vision. It could just be just reading that information and turning it into something useful in time to make a sensible disposal. And if that's the case, I mean, that's not something you can really improve unless, I don't know, maybe he gets a prescription of playing Xbox 12 hours a day or something. I have no idea. But, yeah, I would suspect it's probably more like that. And so fatigue could be an issue because fatigue will always inhibit your ability to focus, and maybe that's something he needs to focus on more. So I think, it could be that combination of fatigue and that lack of that natural ability to just take in information really quickly and make a decision on that basis.
It's an interesting point because it's quite often the fact that he turns it over when he's on his own, when he's sort of having an uncontested kick, he's on his own, no one really near him within about 10, 15 metres, and he kicks inside 50 straight down the throat of an uncontested opponent. So it's not like he's sort of running as hard as he can and, he's under pressure, getting pushed as he kicks and he turns it over. It's often the fact that he's pretty much on his own. So it is pretty interesting. I guess we'll see how his year goes next year. I think his leadership's probably okay. I'm not sure he's the most vocal person out on the ground, but I don't know, maybe he doesn't really need to be. I'm not too sure.
I kind of wonder, like, just going back to my previous comment about hard work versus talent, like whether this is one of those cases where we're seeing that preference for hard work over talent. I'm not saying he's untalented, but that it's more about the fact that he puts forward that example of that old Tom Logan thing, like, you must work this hard to get in the side. And maybe that's, as you say, maybe that's the reason he's on the leadership team.
Yep. All right, moving on, Matthew Lobe, another vice-captain. He's 26 years old. Obviously, he's a ruckman. He played 17 games in 2015, averaged 8.2 disposals a game, 30.4 hitouts, and a massive 1.7 marks a game. We knew, I guess, his numbers would be lower this year with Ryder in the team. I guess we all hoped he could become an asset, maybe somewhere else on the ground, maybe up forward, but it just didn't happen.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a disappointing year for the Lobster. Again, if we talk about it in the context of him being in the leadership group, I'm not certain why he would have been a selection for that. I know that he certainly, like, it reputedly off-field, like he's the head of that state club, the medium res and things like that. So obviously there's a lot of things to keep morale up for the guys, and maybe that's enough to get a gig on the leadership team. But I think that even last year when he was performing reasonably well in ruck, it's weird having a ruckman in a leadership capacity, except for leading other rucks. And of the rucks on our list, I mean, Ryder didn't really need a leader, I suppose. It is a bit of a solitary role. So what the purpose of his place on that leadership team is, I'm not sure. Obviously, his personal performance was a very disappointing year. It's hard to know how much of that is to do with any changes in how we were setting up to take advantage of Ryder, and whether that affected the tendency of our midfield to set up in mind of a more agile ruck than Lobby is. It's hard to say. Hopefully it's one of those things that they can work out over the off-season. But it just wasn't working. And unfortunately, I don't think that at the end of this year we really have any signs that it's been fixed, our ruck situation. You'd have to say he'll get dropped from the leadership group in this off-season.
Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I'm not too sure. I think he was added to the leadership group because he pretty much single-handedly led the ruck by himself the last 2 seasons and worked his ass off. And I think it was that sort of recognition from the club to say, hey, you're worthy of being in the leadership group because of that.
Is it about that's the thing? Is the leadership group, should that really be about that prestige, or should it be about a functional purpose? Because as you said, he did it on his own, and really, I think that Lobby is probably one of those guys that, if it's a one-on-one duel, he probably does a bit better, rather than being part of a team thing, which probably explains a little bit of why he's less effective around the ground. That's not the sort of personality you'd say would be naturally a leader, I would have thought.
Yeah. Oh, look, I mean, in terms of him as a leader, I mean, I guess he's an older player in the team. He had quite a good year in 2014 where he was working quite hard. But I tend to agree, unless he does a lot off-field that we don't know about, what does he really bring as a leader? This year, in terms of his form, I couldn't believe he was playing as long as he was, and I'm sure he wouldn't have been had we I guess not had him in the leadership group. He's still got a lot of hit outs. His hit out numbers weren't bad, but it was almost like he was doing a ruck drill and not really hitting to anyone. And the amount of times teams seem to read a Lobie tap straight down their throat while our midfielders were all wrong-footed by his tap was staggering. I'm not sure who's running our kind of midfield strategy or whether that's part of it, but it was really, really hard to watch a lot of times this year. And he's still working hard. And I guess early on I thought maybe it was a bit to do with the fact that he'd been injured and maybe he was carrying something, but it just went on all year. And my best 22 going forward would not have Lobie in it. It would be it would be Ryder as the sole ruck with Dixon backing him up, because I just don't it's a liability. He's a liability when he's feeding opposition midfielders that much, and he doesn't offer enough around the ground to make up for that.
Yeah, it was certainly a poor year. I think that everything we're saying about him is saying this is probably more a prestige appointment than a functionality appointment, which that's kind of a bit worrying. But I don't know. I don't know what we do with that.
So where do we go with Lobie? Like you mentioned, Scorch, that he would be out of your round 1 team next year. I mean, is it worth trading him? There's been a lot of discussion about whether he's, whether that's the path that we need to actually take. Is that a worthy thing to do?
I tend to think we just look at this stage. Sorry, at this stage of the if we have, I guess, Ryder go down, we need him playing. We don't have anyone else who's senior, so I wouldn't trade him at this point. I would foresee that maybe next year he'll be traded when he doesn't play a game, if I had my way. But at this stage, I'd keep him on the list because he's an experienced backup, and why he is a bit of a liability. He's not getting beaten by like Jacobs when he got beaten by Jacobs, and Jacobs had like 70 hit outs. He's just struggling a little bit. So I keep him on the list and, as a good backup. And if eventually he decides he wants to be traded because he's not getting an opportunity, then we trade him. But he's also probably fairly popular amongst the players. And given that, I think given how kind of close our playing group seems to be, I'd be wary of trading any of those kind of integral members of that against their will. Look, I just don't see it's a spot for him in the team the way he was playing. We need a big upswing in form.
Yeah, I think it comes down to an assessment of how willing and how ready our midfield is to play to a losing ruck. So if we talk about the potential of playing Ryder and then having either a part-timer or I suppose even potentially like an under 20-year-old ruckman come in as a backup, because remembering that we don't have a Super Bowl next year, so we can do things like that again. If we feel that we're already capable of playing to a losing ruck, which potentially we are, particularly with our strong defensive setup, it might be that we do just say, okay, well, we only need one ruck for the next couple of years until we have someone, that can be an aggressive attacking ruckman for us. And it might be that Ryder is that, but as a second option. It might be that we do seek to trade Lobby. I really am reluctant to think that we wouldn't trade him because he's a good bloke. I think that if we're aiming to be a premiership side the next couple of years, and realistically we are, we need to have an acceptance, not just at list management level, but across the whole club, that there are going to be sacrifices to achieve that goal, and that can mean that good guys get cut. Not after you've given them every opportunity to perform, but to actually do it when the team needs it and not when the players deserve it or not, by whatever measure you give that. It's really got to be about team and club first, and one of the ways in which you set the tone is through your list management. So I think that's where we are with Lobby. I certainly wouldn't want us not considering a valuable trade that could get us closer to a premiership, because he's a good guy.
I think if we had another sort of competent ruckman on our list that's a bit experienced that could fill in, I think we may be saying goodbye to Lobby, but I think it may be just a little bit too hard to do that at this point unless we can trade in another ruckman, which I'm not sure we'll be able to do. But I know it's a tough one. I really like Lobby when he's in form. I just need him to do a bit more. You know, we just need something from him around the ground, and I guess that's the other issue, is that can we afford to be playing Lobby when he's just a complete non-event, when he's not actually in the art of ruck work?
Well, yeah, it's like watching the Crows, and I think I've given this example before. It's like watching the Crows when it was Matthew Clark as their number one ruckman, and you'd love it because he'd probably do okay with a lot of the taps, but as soon as he didn't have the ball, he was just a dead weight on the field. And as much as Matt Lobby's played well, I still feel like his best game is probably only about the same level as, say, a Brendan Lade fairly good game, or a Matthew Primus fairly good game, or a Dean Brogan fairly good game. I think has one of those form lines that because he's sort of popped up during an era where we've been kind of shit, we think he's better than he is, and I'm not convinced he has offered, even at his peak point, anything close to what we would normally expect of a top-rate ruckman.
I don't think his lack of marking is a massive issue in itself. I mean, Nick Naitanui is one of the best ruckmen in the league, and he's probably the worst marker in the league as well. He pretty much never ever takes any marks. But it's the fact that Lobby actually doesn't perform anything else around the ground. He doesn't win clearances. He doesn't pick up the ball. He certainly doesn't kick goals. I think that's probably the main issue that I have with Lobby.
Yeah, he's not the guy that you sort of see chipping in on half-back or half-forward as part of a run down the field. He's really not involved in that at all for the most part. If he's lucky, he gets on the tail end. But as far as actual structure, the importance of our ball movement, he's just really a non-factor for us. Honestly, I think the more we're talking about Lobby, the more I'm thinking, we really should trade him if we can.
When his ruck work fell away so much, his stuff around the grounds, you can't get away with that. You've got to be doing very, very well at your stoppage work when you're that much of a liability around the ground, and he's not offering enough to be in my team at the moment. I think. Not when we've got Ryder, who's a perfectly good replacement. If he was the only ruckman on our list, then it's a different story, but he's not anymore. We paid a lot to get a good elite ruckman, and we've got one. Why play Lobby?
Yeah. No, all fair points. Moving on, talking about Jackson Trengove, who's next on the leadership list. He's 24 years old, plays as a centre-half back, played 15 games, the lowest in his career since his gameless debut season. He averaged 12 touches, 3.8 marks and 1.8 rebounds from the defensive 50 per game. Had a really great start to the season, played some really strong football in the first half of the year before missing some games with injury mid-year. He beat the likes of Zach Clark, Kurt Tippett, Josh Jenkins, Jesse White and Rory Lobb throughout the season. How do we see Trengove's season?
Look, basically, overall defensively, he was quite good. I think he beats his man. He seems to read the ball coming in quite well, and he takes a lot of important intercept marks. I think our structure fell away a little bit defensively when we lost both him and Carlisle. And we missed him a bit. I think the story of the year for Trengove was the lack of rucking, and I think when rucking was an issue all year for us, he just did not take any centre bounces for whatever reason this year when he was so dangerous in that role in 2014. Defensively, he was quite good, and I think we'll have some selection headaches next year with him and Carlisle. You'd assume automatic ins, and our other tall defenders playing quite well. So, but yeah, look, I just want to see him ruck more. I think. Overall, he had a reasonable season when he was fit without being outstanding. But he really had that awesome extra string to his bow with his, late game rucking where he'd jump all over the opposing ruckman's head and just his competitiveness around the contests. And he's a good defender, but he became a very, very dangerous player when he had that role as well. And when he's not doing that, he's just a good defender.
Yeah. I mean, look, he won us games playing in the ruck in previous seasons. He won us a showdown in the last quarter playing in the ruck. So the fact he didn't play pretty much any ruck at all this year was pretty disappointing for me. And certainly at stages in the season, we really, really did need that. We needed someone different going in there.
I don't personally have an issue with Trengove not playing in ruck this year, and I don't have a problem with him not playing in ruck much at all. I think he's proven he can do it. And I think that makes... I think one of the things you see in premiership sides is that sometimes players that have a bit of flair, they rein it in and they only bring it out on certain occasions. And I think, for me, that's what Trengove has really done this year. Like, he's been a solid defender. The fact that he hasn't been filling in ruck, it certainly gave the opportunity for our actual ruckman to perform, and that hasn't happened. But that opportunity was there because we weren't just stopping a gap. Similarly, Trengove was given more opportunity to really lock down the defensive role and concentrate solely on that. But here it comes, when we come to finals time in future years, we know that Trengove can be a pinch hitter and ruck. And it'll always be one of those things that the opposition will sort of have to take account for or be concerned about, is the fact that we might put Trengove in ruck. And if we don't do it every week, then that makes it much more threatening when we do, because we know what's going to happen and they may or may not have prepared for it based on previous matches. So it just becomes a trick. It becomes a trick like what Trent Ormanellen in ruck, or it becomes a trick like Westhoff in ruck. It becomes something you bring out occasionally when it's something that's tactically useful for the team, and it doesn't become something you rely on. And it gives an opportunity for people that are actually full-time ruckmen to develop in that role, which certainly with someone like Billy Frampton on the list, that's something we want to leave space for the actual rucks to get better at ruckman, get better at ruck work. Because we know Trengove can pinch hit, and we've established that now, and that's not going to change.
I guess maybe it was a case. Yeah, no. Look, I get what you're saying, and maybe it was a case of we really wanted to push the Ryder Trengove. Ryder Lobie partnership early on, and I imagine that's what we wanted to do. And maybe we thought we won't. Trengove's a very important part of our back line. We won't risk him in the ruck and have him, battering his body into opposition ruckman all day, and we'll leave him down there as an important back because we don't need him in the ruck anymore. I think as the season went on, then it turned out we did need him a little bit more, and I think both Ryder and Lobie missed a stack of games, and they probably only played about half the games between them when they were both playing all year. So, that could be what they're thinking. And I've no doubt we'll definitely see him in the ruck at some point in the future. I just thought it was a bit of a shame because he had shown so much. But I definitely agree with what you're saying about him being that being something he can bring out when we need it. And him, there's nothing wrong with him just being a very good key defender. And that's what we need, and he's very valuable in that role. He reads the play quite well. He's a general back there. He's physical, which we lacked early on in the year. I'm overall quite happy with his form. I just thought it was a bit of a shame given how he did win us games the year before that it didn't happen. But if we are going forward with that Lobie Ryder duo, or maybe Dixon Ryder duo in the ruck or something like that, then I can see him missing again, only coming in when we need him. No, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's good. But overall, we had a pretty good year when he was on the park.
Yep. Next player to talk about, Tommy Jonas, 24-year-old halfback. 17 games for 13.4 disposals, 2.3 rebounds, and the same in tackles as well. Mr. Reliable was probably the one player who suffered the biggest downturn in form in 2015. I thought he had a really good start to the year, was great on Walters in round 1, really good on Bruce in round 4, good on Gartlett in round 9. But after that, he was a bit of a mess, had 5 or 6 really bad games where he just seemed to lose all confidence with the bowl, constantly turned it over, defended poorly, and ended up dropped. I guess credit to him, he came back and played some really good footy to end the season, 4 really solid games there. But we really do need Jonas back at his best next year.
Yeah, I think that Jonas's season was pretty much the tail of our defence. That form line you mentioned pretty much corresponds exactly to our defensive group as a team, basically. I think our best games, obviously, at the start of the year and in the end of the year, across the board for halfbacks, back pockets, tools, everyone. And so when that sort of thing happens, and for me it sort of points to one of two things. It either points to the idea that Jonas is the linchpin of our defence, or that what was happening with Jonas was a symptom of our defence rather than necessarily his own individual form. Obviously, his own form is going to have some impact on that, and particularly when you're mentioning his disposal, it certainly is a factor. But there's something bigger going on when there's that kind of correspondence, I feel, and I think that I'm disappointed with Jonas's middle of the year, but I think going into next year, I've got no real issue with him staying in the side and performing the role he has previously. I think our defensive unit's matured a lot. And I think with Nathan Bassett in the side, he plays the Nathan Bassett position in our defence effectively. I think that he can only improve.
Yeah, look, I can't think of a team like a player who seemed to have lost so much about his game over an off season. He was, 2014. We're talking about a guy who can play tall, play small. He's physical. He's he's assured with the ball in hand, and was just good at everything. And he just seemed to lose every facet of his game this season, and it was really disappointing to see. I guess the only really good thing about this season was that when he did finally get dropped, well after he should have been, too late, he then came in and played quite well in his last few games after being dropped. So, that was a credit. I'll credit to him, but the first 2/3 of the year were terrible. You really hope it was just a blip, and whatever caused that has been fixed and will be fixed going into next season, because he was quite good in the last few rounds, but just every facet of his game was shocking in the first 2/3 of the year.
Look, he's definitely got improvement. Hopefully we can see him back to his best, because as we know, he is such an important and versatile player. He can play on smalls, can play on tolls, can do a defensive tagging job on midfielders. He really can do it all, and I'm looking forward to a big season from Tommy Jonas next year, and I've got no doubt he'll be back to his best after a big pre-season, and hopefully he can improve, and our defence will no doubt improve with it. Next player to talk about, Hamish Hartlett. 25-year-old midfielder, played 22 games, every match for the first time in his career. 22.2 disposals a game is a career high, as was his 3.4 clearances and 6 tackles per game. It was a bit of a different role for Hammer in 2015. He spent more time inside and maybe more time behind the ball as well. I think it did wonders for his personal game, but maybe his lack of goals were detrimental to the team at times.
I feel that this year we saw Hamish Hartlett play the role that Port tried to play Stephen Salopek in all that time ago. Just that, what they call in draft parlance, and I suppose in America they call that quarterbacking role, where he just sort of a little bit behind the play and setting it all up. I think that with someone that's got his quality of kick, it's not a bad place for him to be. You could say that we missed out on his goal-kicking performance, but if he's being useful where he is, which he certainly was, then it's hard to blame him for not being somewhere else, when we certainly know that like the guy that we would normally rely on for that half-forward disposal, like, most definitely would be someone like Jared Polek. Like, he's the guy that we are actually talking about missing, not Hamish Hartlett. And certainly when Matt White was out, that was missing as well, and with Angus Monfries. And, we had a whole bunch of those goal-kicking forwards that would be doing what you just said, and that we sort of Hamish Hartlett has done in the past, but playing where he was valuable to the side, and I think he's probably, going forward, that's his role, in my view. I wouldn't see a reason to justify him going forward unless it was for matchups or something like that.
Yeah, I definitely tend to agree. I think he had his best year, and I think he had a little bit of the opposite of what we were talking about Boak, where, apart from goals, his numbers weren't too different to what he was doing. I guess in previous years, but he just seemed to be so much more damaging with what he was doing, and that was a real credit to him. And whether that was the role he was playing, but he just really came into his own this year. Absolutely fantastic effort from him, and a credit to him. I think a few years ago we talked about him just being constantly injured, and then he's kind of always teased us without ever really showing that top form. And if he can play that well again, then the other players that can play that well around him, he's going to be a very valuable player in hopefully a flag tilt. So full credit to him. He was definitely the the best improvement of any of our leadership group this year. It was really good to see him play well.
Yeah, 100% agree. He had probably a little bit of a lull patch mid-season, maybe a bit of a poor month where he was sort of, I guess, struggling to impact despite still getting really good numbers. There were some calls for him to be dropped on the forums, but in the end, from the Sydney game onwards, he barely put a foot wrong, and it was almost close to our best player in the second half of the season.
Yeah, certainly is the most consistent in a lot of, certainly in terms of his the effectiveness of his disposal. So when you saw him with the ball, you knew he was going to do something good with it, and that's hugely important. But in a skill role, that's kind of what you'd expect, and what he is playing now is definitely a skill role. I think you'd have to say you'd be pretty satisfied with his year, and you'd also be a little bit. You'd be a little bit wondering why his name is being thrown around, not by Port, but by opposition clubs as someone that might be unseatable at Port Adelaide, because to everyone that watches Port Adelaide, it looks like he's finally found his role, and to suggest that might be an unstable position for him is just kind of bizarre, and I'm not sure what that's based in at all.
I think it's more based on other teams wanting Hamish Hartlett in their side. I mean, if someone like Richmond or North Melbourne are prepared to offer $750,000 a year for Hamish Hartlett, then more power to them. And I guess if you're Hammer, you've maybe got to weigh that up, because I don't think he's going to get that sort of money at Port. I think it's really a case of whether he takes that sort of Godfather deal or whether he stays true at Port Adelaide. But in the last half an hour, an article went up on Fox Sports website saying that he's actually close to re-signing a deal which should see him be a one-club player, a long-term deal for Port. So hopefully that's the case. There's been a lot of different sort of information going around from, the Crows being interested to us, almost being forced to trade him because of our salary cap, and suddenly our salary cap's not an issue, and, it's... there's all sorts of information, so hopefully that one's a correct one, and he signs a contract in the next couple of weeks.
Just absolute garbage, that trade talk. The only reason you'd be trading someone like Hamish Hartlett is if he was absolutely banging down the door. Maybe he got a Godfather offer or whatever, or he just didn't want to be here anymore. It's staggering, Like, can we just go to other teams' lists and pick one of their best performed players and say, oh yeah, they probably can't afford him, so can we do that to Hawthorn? Can we say, oh, Jordan Lewis, geez, Hawthorn have got a lot of premiership players, they probably can't afford to keep Jordan Lewis, so we'll have him, thanks. What a load of crap. Unless he's banging down the door demanding to be traded, he's not going anywhere.
There's also one other thing I think about that, and if you think about Hartlett's football career. So the role we've finally found for him, it hasn't come quickly, and it hasn't been a natural role for him. And it certainly has been one that has very much depended on the structure that Port Adelaide have put around him. So we've already talked about, I've talked about extensively about how I love our defence right now. And he's certainly in that skill role. He depends heavily on all the players around him doing their jobs. So if you're Hamish Hartlett's manager and you're saying, oh, why don't you go play for Melbourne? Well, the reality is if he goes to Melbourne, that entire support structure that's making him viable in this role just completely vanishes. We've already saw that, I suppose, with Melbourne. I've seen him a few times this year, like Lumumba, who normally looks like a decent player. Like, he was just shit for Melbourne because he didn't have that support, and I think that Hartlett would be pretty much in the same boat. He's a skill player in a specialised position now, and not every team has room for that position in their current structure. So I think that limits his market if he wants to be a high-performing player in the future, particularly with his tendency to have more injuries and troubles in other positions. Yeah.
I mean, you look at Richmond and North Melbourne, and, Hamish Hartlett's probably the type of player that you want to try and attract. I mean, North Melbourne are playing off for a grand final. Will they get there? Maybe not, but a big sort of performing midfielder that's performed in big games, kicks goals, can do it all. I mean, that's the sort of player that they really need in their side, and Richmond as well. I mean, they're banging down the door of a premiership, so, Hamish Hartlett's the type of player that you'd probably want to try and attract, to be honest. So, which is strange, because for the last couple of years, I've actually been saying, oh, maybe we should actually look at trading Hamish Hartlett to try and attract a key position forward. So now that we've actually attracted a key position forward without having to trade Hamish Hartlett, I'm completely against it. So
there is one thought that's in my mind, which is that it's not a great thought, but if we really baller this off season, then the theory behind trading Hartlett is pretty similar to the theory we had a few weeks ago about potentially trading one of our attacking halfbacks, in that if we did lose him, I think we could cover him. We'd lose a little bit of their top-end performance, but what we could potentially get in return could be quite large. I don't want us to do it, but I could see if Port were like really making a serious play, like we did back in the day when we got in someone like Dimmer, or one of our big recruits that we brought in, like I suppose Wakeland or whoever else. Like if we're really making a play, I could see that he could go, but I don't think we're that sort of team. But we could be. It'd be a big change.
Would be a big change. We'd, as he's under contract, you'd certainly want something pretty bloody good in return.
Yeah.
And I don't think a draft pick would. A draft pick wouldn't cut it. It would have to be a top 10 player at a club. And the last player in the leadership group is Ollie Wines, a 20-year-old midfielder. After playing 52 consecutive games from his debut in round 1 in 2013, we saw a glimpse of his body failing for the first time. Just played the 13 games this year, only 11 full ones, but still managed career highs all across the board. Take out the Saints game where he got injured 5 minutes in and he averaged 26 touches, 5.6 tackles, 6.5 clearances and 4 inside 50s a game. Very, very impressive numbers for someone still so young.
Yeah, he's a great player. I don't really have much to say about Wines because it's like, oh yeah, that was a year. He's performed up to my expectations in every respect, given particularly the injury. I think that we're just going to next year saying, yeah, Ollie Wines, he's good, isn't he? And we just move on, in my view. I don't think there's a lot to say apart from he's a gun. He's an absolute gun.
Yeah. It's we're at the stage now where we almost just expect that a 20, 21-year-old is going to be leading the line in our midfield, being one of our best players. And I guess a wingard's a bit more flashy, but Wines just is, I think we said a couple of years ago, he could just never get better, and he'd end up being one of the, a 250-gamer club champion type midfielder, probably been up with a couple of Australian Guernseys once he was a bit more widely known. And look, just what a star. It's a shame, but we really miss him this year in a lot of facets, especially the bullocking work around the packs and his ability to get handballs out. And I think players like Boak especially really would have missed him. So really hope he's back and fit and he gets a good preseason into him because he's such a good player. It's almost unfair. Like we sucked when the expansion sides came in to just because we didn't get a top 5 pick despite winning 8 games over 2 years. But to end up with Wines and Wingard,
karma was on our side.
Ridiculous outcome for us, and it really is launching us forward. So fantastic. Looking forward to his next year. Hopefully he can stay fit because he's really important to us.
Yeah, he really did become an on-field leader in 2015 as well, and he really did become that sort of pure midfield clearance winner. The talk of him spending more time up forward in 2015 from the pre-season didn't really eventuate. I assume we were struggling to win the bowl at stoppages for much of the year, and the club decided to keep him in the middle more often when he was on the park. I don't think he's unfallible. I was pretty critical of his bowl use at times. He can sometimes rush his disposal a little bit, maybe make some poor decisions here and there, but sometimes I don't think he realises how much space he's actually got out there. And I would actually love to see him actually spend some more time up forward. We know how damaging he can be, and he's a wonderful kick for goal. And I think if we are to win a flag, Ollie is the sort of player that really needs to bump that up and kick 20 to 25 goals a year for us. And I really do think with the emergence of Archie as a possible mainstay in the side, it should really give Ollie the opportunity to spend more time up forward. And I'd love for him to become that sort of Rashudo, Buckley, Voss type that can go forward and kick a few goals every week.
I think it would be nice, but I don't see it as a necessity for him to do that. I think that if he just grinds it out every week, then we'd be pretty happy. It would be good to see him get a bit more time, certainly in the next couple of years, but primarily from a development perspective rather than a team need, just to show that he can play that sort of game for when we do occasionally need him to. But if we're talking long term, I think long term, he's just going to be our grunt in midfield, realistically. I think that's where he is best suited for in every aspect of his game. And as long as he doesn't start getting somehow shut out of that role, then it's a sustainable role, really, for him to just keep playing for the rest of his career. Realistically, there's plenty of midfielders around the league that have not been goal kicking half forwards, and they can be extremely good.
I think Ollie's the type of player with that sort of body type. He's hard to match up on. He's deceptively tall, very, very strong. He could be that player that can rest in the forward pocket with the new rules next year and hopefully take a couple of grabs up forward and slot a few goals.
I guess I've got two criticisms of him in that respect of either being a marking mid-forward or a running mid-forward. And that is, I don't think he has the pace to play a real outside game, and I don't know that he's got the marking ability to play that tough contested role. I think those are probably the two weaknesses in his skill set, and they're both applicable to forward-playing midfielders. I don't see it as something that'll ever be a strength for him personally.
Yeah. No, that's a fair call. His best games throughout the year, round 1 versus Freo, he had 27 touches and 2 goals. He just loves playing against Freo. I thought one of his career best games was against Collingwood in round 15, the Phil Walsh tribute match, where he had a career high 33 disposals and 10 tackles, 8 clearances and 5 inside 50s. And you could just tell how much that game meant to him. Yeah,
look, he's got a lot of heart, there's no doubt. I kind of feel like when I'm watching Ollie Wines play, I feel much the same way about his performance as I used to feel about Warren Treadray earlier on in his career, in that you could just see like he was all about the game, and he just feels so confident. Like I remember watching Warren Treadray, and you'd start clapping before he took a mark because it was just so certain it was going to happen. And I'm beginning to feel like that really with Ollie Wines as far as clearances. Like, oh, there's Ollie. Yeah, this is sorted out. Let's see where he's going to get it to downfield. It's just amazing how much confidence I've got in this young guy in such a short time, and he's just continued a fantastic form line of performance. It's just been really great to see, and we are so lucky to be having him at our side. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I do tend to agree, and I wonder going forward. We in his absence, we uncovered, I guess, Archie and Sam Gray as kind of inside mid types. Archie especially in that same kind of role, and I wonder with the help he's going to get in that role, because he was really our main man. I think going into the season, we hope maybe more would come on, but we really saw it from Arch and Sam Gray, obviously not the big body, but Sam Gray a little bit as an inside mid. Will we see him given the opportunity to maybe get a bit more outside ball and develop that side of his game, because he's not required to be the bull at every single stoppage, and I'd really like to see that. And he clearly reads the game quite well, and I've no doubt that he could develop that and maybe learn to do things like kick goals more frequently, because he's not so required at every stoppage. That said, you wouldn't want to water down what he is good at and make him and take away from that, but it'd be really good to see going into round 1 with, I mean, you'd have to assume at least 2 of those 3 guys getting picked, probably all 3, and how that affects our stoppage setups this year, because we had so much going against us this year with Wines out for a lot of the year, the ruckman issues all year, about who was rucking, the ruckman injuries, Lobie tapping into opposition players. So I'm really looking forward to our stoppage setups, because I think that's somewhere where we really can improve. We've got so much stoppage talent there with the Rolls Royce of Robbie Gray, the grit of Travis Boak, and I really want it to come together next year, and I really hope it does. I think that could really be where we launch our premiership, will be from that middle part of the ground. So fingers crossed he gets a bit more help next year and he stays fit, and we can really launch from there.
All right, guys. Well, that's it for this evening. It's been a long one. Do apologise for the technical difficulties that we've had throughout this podcast. Scorch, thanks for coming on again, mate.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me. I suspect that I may be at fault for the lag, so I apologise to all of our avid listeners for that. Hopefully, Macca's editing skills mean that you don't know what I'm talking about. But I apologise for that. But yeah, thanks again for having me. It was a really good chat about footy.
Too easy. Portia, pleasure as always.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully next week Skype will be less agitated than it was this week, and we'll be able to record on the right night and without this horrible lag. But, it was a good discussion. I'm a little bit sad that it's over. I want to talk more, but I'm not going to. It's too long.
All right, peeps. Until next time, go Port Adelaide.
No worries. Go the Power.
Can't
Thank you very much. Go the Power.
Spears it inside 50. Schultz comes hard. Flicks it out. Boats. It'd be appropriate. The captain. That is gold class. Leadership agrees with Travis Boat. He's better than ever.